I certainly am grateful for the good work from the gentleman from Montgomery County, but I do not support this bill. I know this comes as a recommendation from the grand jury. But Mr. Speaker, the grand jury's recommendations are purely that, the recommendations. The grand jury in its own report acknowledged that they were not experts in the law, and they were not experts in legislation. I asked the Attorney General if they had any testifiers before the grand jury as to law or legislation. Was given no response. I think they had none. So this is a recommendation, but I think as a matter of public policy is bad public policy. So what this bill does, Mr. Speaker, is to tie the statute of limitations in Pennsylvania for failure to report abuse on the part of a mandated reporter to the underlying offense. So up until last week, the only offense that carried no statute of limitations was murder, where there is always physical evidence and never a victim to testify. But last week, this body voted to make child abuse, child sexual abuse, an offense for which there is no statute of limitations. So now we would make a third offense subject to no statute of limitations. Now, what is the offense in this case? It is failure to report. It is a presence of mind situation where the accused would have to be able to testify as to what they were thinking at the time. By eliminating the statute of limitations, Mr. Speaker, you have left accused defenseless. How can you possibly remember, how can any accused before the bar possibly remember what their presence of mind or what their thoughts were on whether they did or did not report abuse 10, 20, 30 years later? This also applies to all mandated reporters. And as we know, mandated reporters are probably most people in this room. Most volunteers, or all volunteers who work with children, are mandated reporters. At a time when we have difficulty getting volunteers, we're now going to be able to tell our constituents who are mandated reporter volunteers that they will be subject to penalties as a felony forever because we are eliminating the statute of limitations. Mr. Speaker, this has to do with our fundamental rights. Now, if this were a bill about the Second Amendment, we would fight like crazy. If this were a bill about the First Amendment right to organize, we would fight like crazy to preserve those rights. But our due process rights under the law are slipping away between our fingers while we do nothing. I oppose this very vehemently. I would recommend to my colleagues to do the same. Thank you.